What if Ned Stark had seen it coming? Not just the politics, the backstabbing, or the crown's deadly games, but the true threat, the one from beyond the wall. What if in some quiet, bone-deep moment, he looked into the eyes of Benjen Stark or heard the ghost of an ancient tale echo too loudly across the snows of the north, and something shifted in him? What if, instead of riding south to die for a king's pride and a queen's secrets, Eddard Stark had turned his eyes to Winterfell, not as a seat of power, but as the last line of defense for mankind? It begins with a raven, not from King's Landing but from the wall, early, rushed, and reeking of cold fear. Benjen's words are clipped unlike him. They are stirring, not a wildling tale. This is real. They are moving. Ned reads the message in the godswood, beneath the weeping faces of the old trees, and his breath turns white in the air, even though it's spring. He doesn't tell Catelyn, not yet, but something inside him closes like a gate. He makes a choice that day, not to trust the South, not to be dragged into their endless hunger for power. He's seen the rot behind Robert's eyes, heard the whispers in Varys's tone, smelled the fire still lingering in the ashes of the Mad King's throne. Winter is coming, but not in the way the rest of Westeros thinks. He refuses Robert's summons, whispers spread. The king rides north in anger. But Ned does not kneel. He does not fight either. He invites Robert into his hall and lays before him the message from the wall. He speaks plainly, like the Old North. "We were wrong, Robert. The threat is not Cersei or dragons or crowns. It's what's waking beyond the wall." Robert laughs, of course. He drinks himself into rage and mocks the old gods. But Ned doesn't flinch. He tells him to go back to the south and play his Game of Thrones. Winterfell will not join this war. It will prepare for the next one. That's when the first domino falls. Robert storms back to King's Landing. But something's changed. The North's refusal isn't just an insult, it's rebellion. Tywin hears it. Cersei tastes the blood of opportunity. Whispers grow. The North remembers, they say. The North is fortifying. Ravens fly faster than steel. Men begin to choose sides. But while the South sharpens blades for civil war, Ned Stark is carving something else into the cold bones of the North. He closes the gates of Winterfell, not out of arrogance but survival. He sends Maester Lew into every bannerman, not with threats but with truth. The wall is compromised. Winter is no longer just a season, it's alive. Come to Winterfell. Bring food. Bring people. Bring everything you cannot afford to lose. Most think him mad. A few listen. Those few will live longer than the rest. The North begins to change, not just in banners or in silence, but in soul. Blacksmiths no longer forge swords, they forge dragonglass, which Ned begins to trade for at great cost through secret channels, buying it from across the narrow sea, using Old House Stark gold stored for generations. He doesn't tell the children everything, but Robb knows. Jon, stationed at the wall, feels it in his bones. Bran dreams of ice that walks, and wolves that howl without mouths. Arya watches the maids sharpen spears instead of needles. Meanwhile, King's Landing rots faster than usual. Cersei whispers in Robert's drunken ear. The Lannisters smell opportunity. Winterfell is declaring independence, they say. Stark wants to be king. Petyr Baelish fans the fire. Varys warns of something worse, but no one listens. Tyrion drinks, frowns, and writes a quiet note to Jon at the wall. "Tell me if your uncle was right," and then the wall falls. Not all at once. Not with trumpets or flames, but in silence, cold snow, and screams that don't echo because sound freezes in the air before it can travel. Jon survives, barely. He sees what Benjen saw. He flees not south, but home. The wildlings are already running, pouring toward Castle Black, clawing through ice and stone just to escape what's behind them. Jon kills one of them, an old woman whose eyes are blue. She doesn't bleed. She breaks. When he returns to Winterfell, he is changed. His eyes don't blink the same. Ned sees it. "What did you see?" he asks. Jon doesn't speak at first. But eventually he whispers, "They don't burn." That's when the fortress becomes a sanctuary. Ned sends ravens to every corner of the north. House Manderley, House Glover, House Umber, not for war, but for survival. Bring your people. Bring the old, the children, anyone who cannot fight. Leave the rest to prepare. Winterfell must hold, but not all listen. The Boltons laugh. The Karstarks think Ned has lost his honor. They declare for the south. "We will not be ruled by fear," they say. They vanish within a week. Their lands go quiet. When scouts return, They speak of empty halls, bones frozen mid-meal, and banners that hang untouched in a windless chill. The others are moving, south of the Neck. Whispers of Ned Stark's isolationist kingdom spread. The South believes he's hoarding power. Stannis calls it treason. Renly calls it stupidity. Cersei calls it an opportunity, but none of them understand, not yet. Ned isn't building a kingdom. He's building a wall of flesh, blood, and fire. A last stand. Robb trains every child above 10 with a spear. Arya leads them. She names her weapon Mercy, but there's no mercy in her strikes. Sansa begins organizing food storage with Maester Luwin, turning feasts into rations, candles into maps, and sewing into defense plans. Bran watches everything but dreams more than ever. Hodor stays close. Too close. He knows something none of them do. Meanwhile, Jon returns to the ruins of the wall, leading scouts to find survivors. What they find isn't people, it's the truth. The army of the dead is real, and it's growing. One night, while the snow falls without pause and the wind moans like a dying giant, Jon rides back into Winterfell. He dismounts without a word, falls to his knees and says, "We need more fire." Ned doesn't ask what he means. He only nods. He sends word to Dragonstone, to the girl with dragons, Daenerys, not as a pledge of loyalty, not as a servant, but as a warning. If you want to live, come north, or die as a queen of ashes. That raven changes the world, because fire is the only thing the dead fear, and Winterfell is about to become the furnace of the living. But before any of that, the silence grows deeper, because deep in the woods just beyond the tree line, something stands still and watches. It does not blink, it does not breathe, it waits, and it remembers the name Stark, and it hates it, and it hates it. The first snow that didn't melt came in silence. Not a storm, not a flurry, just a slow, steady fall that refused to vanish underfoot. The grounds of Winterfell were blanketed overnight. Children woke up whispering about ghost footprints in the snow. Wolves howled, but not from hunger. And Jon Snow stood on the ramparts, staring north, knowing what was coming. Ned watched him from behind. His son, though not by blood, had come back changed. The boy who left for the Night's Watch had been full of honor, yearning to prove himself. But the man who returned, he was ice on the outside and fire buried deep inside. Not rage, not pride, just a quiet, unshakable urgency. Jon no longer looked to be seen. He looked because someone had to. That morning, the first of the true refugees arrived. Not noble families, but wildlings, shaggy-haired men, terrified mothers, children wrapped in bloodied furs, and elderly dragged on makeshift sleds. Many were half-frozen. Some didn't survive the ride. But the look in their eyes was worse than the wounds. They had seen death, and it had looked back. Arya met them at the gate. Not with pity, but with purpose. She didn't flinch at the smell or the rot or the crying. She just pointed them to shelter and barked orders like she'd done it all her life. Behind her, Gendry hammered dragonglass into spear tips, his hands blistered but steady. He'd come weeks ago, called by nothing more than a whispered message and a sense that the world was changing. He was right. The Southern Lords still mocked them. Cersei laughed when word reached her that Ned Stark was harboring wildlings inside Winterfell's walls. "He's building his own funeral pyre," she told Jaime over wine. Let him burn in the snow, but Jaime didn't laugh. Not this time. Something in him had shifted ever since he heard about the fall of the wall. He remembered the way the old Kingsguard used to whisper about monsters in the north, not metaphorical ones, not Starks, but the real kind. Creatures with eyes like frozen skies and voices like cracking bone. He couldn't sleep at night anymore. In the north, plans were no longer political. They were survival. Maester Luwin kept records by the hour, mapping how much grain they had left, how much dragonglass had been forged, how many mouths needed feeding. Sansa had emerged not just as a lady, but as a leader. She controlled the supplies like a queen and made harsh decisions without flinching. Once she refused to give second portions to a lord's household, saying, "Nobility dies just as quickly as common folk when the dead come." The lord left hungry. Nobody questioned her again. Jon took the blacksmiths into the crypts. It was there they discovered what no one expected. The old Stark tombs, layered deep in stone and dust, had pockets of heat. Not warmth, something older. Magic, maybe, or just secrets buried with first men. Whatever it was, Jon used it. He set up dragonglass forging chambers in the deepest crypts, using the earth itself as insulation. The air down there didn't just chill, it hummed. Robb Stark took charge of the defenses. Every stone of Winterfell's walls was checked, reinforced. Archers drilled with dragon-glass-tipped arrows. The moat was frozen solid, so he ordered it filled with oil and covered it in a thin layer of snow, so it would burn when needed. "If we must burn Winterfell to save the world, we will," he said once. No one laughed. Outside the walls, Theon Greyjoy stood watch with the others. He had stayed, though he could have fled. No one asked why. Maybe even he didn't know. But at night, when the wind carried whispers and the trees cracked under invisible footsteps, Theon stood straighter than most. And then came the silence. Not the cold, not yet. Just stillness, no birds, no wind, just the air holding its breath. And with it the first scouts returned, or rather their horses did, bloodied, empty, riderless. One of them was carrying a sack. Inside were 5 human fingers. Frozen solid, Jon clenched his jaw. "They're close," he said. Ned nodded. It was time. The northern lords who had answered his call arrived in staggered waves. Manderlys brought ship's stores from White Harbor. Salted meat, dried fish, barrels of oil. The Glovers came armed to the teeth. Even the old Bear Island sent warriors. Lyanna Mormont, barely tall enough to reach the battlements, refused to stay behind. "I'd rather die fighting than live watching," she said. Ned didn't argue, but not all bannermen were loyal. The Boltons sent nothing. The Karstarks closed their gates. Worse, some had begun whispering about surrender. The dead are many. Why not bend the knee to them? Why fight a storm that never ends? Those men never made it to Winterfell. No one asked where they went, and in the shadows of Winterfell's walls, Bran Stark grew quiet. Too quiet. He no longer spoke of ravens or wolves. He simply stared, sometimes for hours, into the fire. Sometimes he whispered to Hodor. No one understood the words. Then one night he stood. He walked. On his own. Not with Hodor, not with help. He walked to Ned in the Godswood and said only one thing: they're already inside the north. And the next day, the bodies were found. A scout patrol. 12 men, no wounds, just frozen where they stood. Eyes wide, mouths open. One of them still held a sword, but it was shattered like glass. And beside them, burned into the snow, were words in blackened ice. "The last hearth melts first." Jon's blood turned to ice. Last hearth, home of the Umbers, Winterfell's closest bannermen. Jon and Robb rode that same night. When they arrived, the gates of Last Hearth were wide open, no lights. No noise, just snow, and a single figure standing in the center of the courtyard. It was a boy, Ned Umber, or what was left of him, blue eyes. Frosted skin, and when Jon approached, the boy screamed, a high-pitched, unnatural, bone-breaking sound, and behind him, they came, not thousands, not yet, just a taste, enough to remind the living that they were prey. Jon raised Longclaw. Robb drew his sword. They fought side by side as the first of the dead fell upon them, not men, not white something. Older, slimmer, sharper creatures that moved like shadows in moonlight. It took hours to kill them. Till only dragonglass worked. Robb took a cut to his shoulder. The wound smoked. Jon's hand shook as he stabbed the last one through the skull, and when it ended, all that remained was snow soaked with ash. Back at Winterfell, Ned didn't sleep that night. He stood alone in the Godswood and whispered into the darkness, "We are not ready." But the trees didn't answer. They just wept frozen tears. Wept frozen tears. 3 days passed, and the fires in Winterfell never went out. They burned day and night, not for warmth, but to keep the shadows at bay. Every tower had a brazier, every hallway a torch. No corner was left in darkness. Children were taught to sleep with daggers. The youngest learned to strike first, ask never. Jon stood watch most nights now. Sleep had become a memory, something that belonged to a softer world. The dead didn't rest, and neither could he. His armor barely came off anymore. His knuckles were cracked from gripping Longclaw too tightly, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd stared too long into something he couldn't unsee. Robb tried to keep order. Drills, patrols, watch changes, strategy meetings. But even he knew they were not planning to win a war. They were planning to outlast an ending. The attack on Last Hearth had changed everything. The message in the snow. The scream from a dead boy. The way those creatures had moved, intelligent, precise, almost curious. These weren't just whites. They were something worse. Something watching, testing. "They're not marching," Jon said to his father that morning. "They're hunting." Ned nodded, but his eyes were far away. He had sent another raven the night before, to Dragonstone again. No reply had come. He sent one to the Vale, to Riverrun, even to Stannis. None returned. The north was alone. Bran sat beneath the weirwood every day now, not speaking, just staring, like he could see something beyond the clouds, beyond the snow, beyond the bones. Arya stayed near him, silently sharpening her blade. She didn't ask questions anymore. She knew the answers weren't meant for her. That afternoon, a horn blew on the eastern wall, not the alarm. A call for entry. People, dozens, no banners. Just villagers, peasants, and some in broken southern armor. They were dragging carts carrying wounded, walking barefoot in the snow. Behind them, limping along on a horse that looked half dead, was Samwell Tarly. Jon ran to meet him. Sam nearly collapsed. He was thinner, bloodied, but alive. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Eastwatch is gone," he said. "They didn't climb the wall, they melted through it." Like heat from the wrong kind of fire, Ned helped Sam inside and the gates were closed again. He was taken to the war room, where maps were spread like battlefields. He pointed to marks, lines, trails. "They don't move like an army. They scatter, appear, disappear. They use the woods. They don't need roads. They don't make sound. They let the fear do the marching for them." Then Sam looked up, eyes sunken and dry. "I saw one raise the dead just by looking at them." Sansa covered her mouth. Jon's voice was flat. "How many?" Sam swallowed hard. "Thousands, maybe more. Every village they pass through joins them." Ned nodded once. "We'll burn the forests." That night, columns of black smoke filled the northern sky. Whole lines of pine trees were turned to ash. The green children of the forest would have wept if they still existed. But none came to stop it. Not anymore. The heat didn't stop the dead, but it slowed them, forced them to take wider routes, bought time. Every moment mattered now. Jon took a group of scouts beyond the forest line. Ghost padded silently beside him, teeth bared at everything. Gendry came too, carrying 2 hammers forged from dragon glass. Arya followed, despite being told not to. She had a knife and a reason, and that was enough. What they found was worse than they feared. A tree. Not burned, not chopped, but alive and screaming. Its bark twisted into faces. Dozens of them. All human. All real. And at its base, arranged in a perfect circle, were bones. Hundreds of them, children, animals, wolves. At the center, a sigil made of ice. Stark. Jon stared at it for a long time. "They're mocking us," Arya whispered. Jon nodded. "No, they're remembering. When they returned, the winds had changed. Winterfell felt smaller. The walls seemed thinner, the sky darker. Bran finally spoke again that night. One sentence. "They're not after everyone. Just us." When asked what he meant, he only said, "The first men stole something they were never meant to have. Now the dead are here to take it back." No one knew what to make of it. But 2 hours later, the first full wave hit. It started as wind, loud, sudden, and wrong. Then the howling. Then the silence. And then the pounding. The dead didn't climb. They crawled like spiders up the stones. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. Winterfell's eastern wall lit with fire as archers loosed flaming arrows and burning oil was poured. Screams filled the air. The walls held, but barely. They fought all night. Jon led the defense. Robb nearly lost his leg. Theon saved a child and killed 4 wights before his sword snapped. Sansa was dragged from the keep, kicking and screaming as the dead breached the outer courtyard. Arya disappeared. No one knew where she went. And then, just before dawn, something happened. The dead stopped. Every last one, not defeated, just frozen in place like statues. They turned their heads toward the north gate, and from the woods beyond came a sound no one expected. Wings, large ones, burning ones. And then a roar, a dragon, but not just any Drogon. And on his back, Daenerys Targaryen. Behind her, another Rhaegal, but no rider, no sign of Viserion, because Viserion was gone. He had been taken, and the army of the dead hadn't come to destroy Winterfell. They had come to draw her in, because the Night King wasn't outside the walls, he was above them, riding Viserion and smiling. Riding Viserion and smiling. The sky cracked open like a wound, spilling blue fire over Winterfell. Viserion's scream wasn't a dragon's roar. It was agony frozen into sound. His wings cut through the snowstorm, each flap shaking the world beneath. The dead didn't move until he passed overhead. Then, as if commanded by some invisible pulse, they stirred again, thousands of them in perfect rhythm. The Night King rode above them, pale and still, his eyes locked on the fortress that defied death itself. Daenerys circled lower, Drogon roaring in fury. His flames scorched the ground, searing through the dead ranks. Fire devoured ice in waves, but it wasn't enough. For every one that burned, 10 more rose. The heat melted snow into steam, blinding everyone below. Robb's men stumbled through fog and ash, hacking at shadows. Jon shouted orders until his throat bled, his voice barely audible over the storm of wings. Then Drogon and Viserion collided. The sound tore the sky apart. They slammed into each other like living comets, fire and frost, clashing in bursts of color that lit up the night. Shards of ice rained down like knives. Jon ducked behind a wall as one struck beside him, embedding deep into stone. When he looked up, he saw Daenerys clinging to Drogon's neck, eyes wide, face streaked with soot. She saw him too. For a heartbeat, through chaos and flame, they saw each other, and both knew this wasn't a war anymore. This was extinction. Viserion's breath swept across the battlements, freezing men mid-scream. Their armor cracked like glass. Daenerys turned Drogon sharply, unleashing fire hotter than Dragonstone itself. The two dragons spun and roared, colliding again, claws raking scales, blood, red and blue, raining down like burning snow. And the Night King smiled. Jon shouted to the men, "Hold the gate! Fall back to the keep!" But even as they moved, the east wall exploded inward. The dead surged like a tide, crawling over one another, their eyes burning with unnatural light. Ghost leapt into the fray, tearing through limbs and throats, refusing to retreat even when his fur caught fire. Arya appeared from nowhere, slicing through the horde with terrifying precision. She didn't fight like a girl anymore. She fought like vengeance made flesh. Ned stood on the battlements, sword in hand, not ice but a reforged blade of dragon glass and steel. He was older, slower, but his stance didn't waver. He watched as the storm turned his world to ruin. For a brief, desperate moment, he thought of Catelyn, of her smile, of the children as they once were, laughing in the yard, chasing snowflakes. Then the memory shattered under the sound of war. "Father!" Robb's voice tore through the chaos. He was bleeding, dragging a man with half a leg. "The crypts! They're breaking through the crypts!" Ned froze. He had thought the dead would come from the outside. He had forgotten the ones buried beneath his own feet, the tombs of the Starks. The ground trembled. The air filled with the sound of stone cracking, splitting, falling. Dust rose from beneath the courtyard. Then came the first scream from below. It wasn't fear, it was horror. The dead had come home. From beneath the earth, skeletal hands clawed through centuries of stone. The ancestors of House Stark, kings, lords, and warriors, rose from their rest. Not as men, not as memories, but as soldiers of the Night King. Jon saw it first. He dropped to his knees, disbelief frozen on his face. No, that's not... He ran toward the crypt entrance, cutting down anything that moved. "They're ours!" They're not ours anymore." Arya screamed back, blood on her face, her blade flashing red. Sansa was already in the crypt, helping the survivors flee. She turned and saw them, old bones draped in decayed furs, stark crowns still clinging to skulls. One of them reached for her. Its mouth opened. Cade said nothing, but the sound of its bones scraping echoed like laughter. Sansa didn't hesitate. She stabbed it through the eye with a dragonglass dagger. Outside, Drogon and Viserion crashed into the towers. Stone collapsed. Fires spread across the courtyard. The Night King dismounted, landing silently atop the walls. His feet didn't crunch in the snow. He just walked slowly, deliberately, like a god claiming his temple. Jon saw him, and ran straight toward him. The wind screamed between them. The world seemed to stop. Jon's blade gleamed black and white in the flickering firelight. The Night King raised a hand. The dead froze mid-attack. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. "You won't take it," Jon said. "You won't take them." The Night King tilted his head. Then he spoke, not in words, but in something colder. The sound slid under the skin, inside the bones, into the blood. "It was never yours." Then he pointed at Jon, and the world screamed. The dead surged forward again, faster this time. Jon was thrown backward by a wall of bodies. Robb tried to reach him, but was pinned down by 3 whites. Arya leapt from the ramparts, landing on a dead giant's back, stabbing it through the eye. The creature fell, crushing soldiers beneath its weight. Theon dragged children toward the inner keep. Sansa lit torches with shaking hands. Every Stark, every fighter, every name carved into Winterfell's history, was now fighting for the last breath of mankind. And above them, Ned Stark finally moved. He climbed the broken stairs to the battlements, where the Night King stood watching the chaos below, like a painter admiring his masterpiece. Ned's sword trembled in his hand, but his eyes didn't falter. "This was my home," he said. "You'll find no throne here." The Night King turned his head slightly. The wind answered for him. It was not a conversation. It was judgment. Then Ned struck. Steel met frost. The blade shattered on impact. The Night King caught Ned's wrist mid-swing. His touch spread frost through Ned's veins, crawling up his arm across his shoulder toward his heart. Ned gasped but didn't fall. He met those blue eyes and saw something he didn't expect. Memory, recognition, the ghost of the first men's sins staring back at him. And then, before the cold could finish him, fire roared. Drogon's breath hit the battlements, flames sweeping across the stone. The Night King turned, shielding his face. Ned fell back, his arm frozen solid. Daenerys screamed from above, "Burn him!" "Burn him now." Jon heard her voice and looked up, realizing she meant the Night King. But as Drogon unleashed his flame, the heat hit both of them, the monster and the man who had once been Warden of the North. The ice melted. The fire burned. The wall crumbled. When the smoke cleared, only one figure stood. The Night King was gone, Ned Stark was gone, and Jon Snow was on his knees, surrounded by ash. The battle didn't stop. The dead didn't die. But something had changed. The Night King had vanished, not defeated, but waiting. And as the fires dimmed, Bran opened his eyes in the Godswood and whispered the truth. He's not gone. He's inside the walls. He's not gone. He's inside the walls. Smoke bled into the sky, thick and black, covering the moon like mourning cloth. Winterfell was in ruin, not destroyed, but broken in spirit. Its walls, once proud and ancient, were scorched. Its courtyard, once filled with laughter and training. Swords was now layered in ash, blood, and shattered dragonglass. The dead didn't retreat, but they paused, as if waiting, listening. Jon Snow stood in the center of it all, covered in soot, one knee buried in the snow. Longclaw dangled from his hand. His face was empty, not because he felt nothing, but because he felt everything all at once, and there wasn't room to carry it anymore. He had just watched Ned Stark, his father, his North Star, burn beside the creature they all thought unkillable. But the Night King hadn't died. He had vanished, which meant they had failed. Bran's voice echoed from the Godswood, quiet, almost calm. "He's not gone, he's inside the walls." At first no one moved. Then, one by one, heads turned toward the heart of Winterfell. The crypts, the same place they had once sent women and children for safety, the same place the dead had already stirred. Now it was quiet. Too quiet. Arya was already running. She didn't wait for a command. She knew the halls better than anyone. She slipped through shadows like a whisper, blade drawn, breath tight. Her feet barely touched the stone. Ghost followed, silent and close. They didn't speak, didn't call for others. They just moved. Sansa was in the library with the wounded organizing supplies, her hands trembling as she tore strips of cloth for bandages. When the screams came from beneath the castle, she froze. Not out of fear, but realization. The Night King wasn't attacking anymore. He was infiltrating. A worse kind of war. Robb staggered out of the inner keep, blood still soaking through the torn leather at his side. He shouted for men to regroup, for archers to retake the wall. But too many were gone. Dead, or worse, undead. He looked to the skies, hoping to see Drogon still circling, but only smoke remained. Daenerys had vanished too, somewhere in the chaos. Maybe retreating, maybe hunting, maybe already dead. Gendry burst from the forge, dragging a fresh box of blades behind him, hands blackened and raw. "Where is she?" he asked. "Arya, where did she go?" No one answered, because no one knew anymore who was alive, who was lost, or who was about to be turned. In the crypts, Arya moved with surgical precision. The air was thick, wet with decay and frost. Dragonglass daggers in both hands. Ghost stayed at her back, growling low. The stones were cold underfoot, but her feet didn't feel it. She passed broken coffins, crumbled walls, and old memories carved into names. Rickard Stark, Brandon Stark, Lyanna. Then she heard it. Not footsteps, a breath. But it didn't come from ahead. It came from inside her head. He whispered to her. Not in words, but in sensations. Cold, loss, emptiness. And then she saw him. The Night King wasn't made of flesh or frost anymore. He was shadow, slipping between reality and something older. His form flickered between stone pillars like a nightmare never fully waking. His face was unchanged, silent, sharp, eternal. But his presence felt different now. He wasn't hunting. He was choosing. Arya gripped her blades tighter. "You don't belong here," she said. The shadow tilted its head. "You do," it seemed to answer. Then it moved. Not at her, but past her, toward Bran. Above the crypts, in the Godswood, Bran was surrounded by silence. The snow had stopped falling. The wind had gone still. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. He sat alone, eyes open, unblinking, as if watching something that hadn't happened yet. Jon reached him first. He dropped beside him, gripping his shoulders. "Bran, what did you see?" Bran's voice was hollow. "He's not here for the throne. He's not here for war. He's here for the memory of man." Jon stared. "What does that mean?" "If I die, everything dies. The history, the stories, the truth. He wants to end what we are." Jon's heart beat faster. "Then we protect you. With everything." But Bran shook his head. "You can't." And then came the horn. Not from the dead this time, from the outer gate. Another army. Not white, not frozen. Gold. The lions had arrived. Cersei Lannister had sent her own message. She hadn't come to help. She'd come to claim. 5,000 Lannister soldiers stood outside Winterfell's ruins, armor gleaming even under the ashen sky. At their front, Jaime Lannister. He alone rode forward under a white flag. Jon met him at the gate. "You picked a hell of a time to come north," Jon said. Jaime's face was sunken, older somehow. "I didn't come for Cersei. She thinks I'm dead." "Are you?" "Not yet." Jon looked past him at the soldiers. "They won't survive 5 minutes. They won't have to. I didn't bring them to fight the dead." Jon narrowed his eyes. "Then why? To fight the people who still think they can sit on a throne while the world dies around them." Jon stepped back. "You're here to start a civil war?" "I'm here to end one." Inside, Daenerys returned at last, her face streaked with frostburn. Drogon was wounded, one wing dragging. She walked straight to Jon, rage and desperation in every step. "We need to strike now while they're weak. We're not ready." "We'll never be ready," she snapped. "You saw him. You saw what he is, what he wants." "I did," Jon said quietly. "But there's something you need to know." Daenerys froze. Jon stepped closer. "I'm not your enemy." Her eyes flickered. "I'm Aegon Targaryen." For a moment, the world stood still again. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Not Jon Snow, not the bastard of Winterfell, but the last male heir of House Targaryen, and something broke between them, a silence that couldn't be mended. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I didn't want the throne. But you have a claim. I have a choice." They stood in that cold silence until a scream tore through the keep. It was Arya, and behind her, climbing from the cracks in the stone, dozens of figures, not whites, not White Walkers, dead Starks, lords and ladies, Catelyn Stark. Her face half-torn, her eyes burning blue, Rickon Stark, small, broken, and behind them Ned Stark risen empty. A tool. The Night King had learned a new trick. He didn't just raise the dead. He raised your past against you. Winterfell would not fall from the outside. It would crumble from within. Catelyn Stark walked first. Not the woman who had once held her children beneath her cloak to shield them from the wind. Not the mother who wept in silence when Bran wouldn't wake. Who rode to King's Landing for truth, and came home only in the whispers of grief. This Catelyn was silent, mouth slack. eyes hollow and glowing with the same blue that haunted every dream since the wall had fallen. Behind her, Rickon stumbled forward. His tiny hand still clutched a wooden direwolf toy, now cracked and blackened. He didn't speak. He only twitched. And behind him, slow and deliberate, came Eddard Stark. He was not screaming. He was not groaning like the other dead. He was walking with the steady, familiar rhythm of a man returning home. His face was intact, expression still noble, but the eyes were wrong. Lifeless, glowing. Mocking, they looked past the living like they were already forgotten. Arya froze. She was on her knees, one dragon-glass dagger clutched in her fist, the other lost somewhere in the snow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. Her father, her real father, was walking toward her, and she didn't know if she should run, fight, or beg. Robb stared from across the keep, his sword lowering. "Nos," Sansa stepped backward into Gendry's chest. "That's not real," she whispered. "That's not him." Jon stood between them and the crypts, Longclaw burning cold in his hand. He felt his limbs tighten. His heart beat like war drums. He had fought many things, beasts, men, whites, but not this. Not the man who raised him. Not the man whose voice had been his compass in every storm. Then Ned's eyes found Jon, and he stopped, just for a second, and smiled. That smile, familiar, quiet, kind, and utterly wrong. It was not a smile for Jon, it was a smile from the thing inside his father's skin. A creature that knew this moment would break him, and then he ran. Jon surged forward with a scream, swinging Longclaw in a clean arc, his blade tearing through two whites before he reached Ned. Their swords clashed, steel and dragonglass, cold and fury. They fought in silence. No roars, no taunts. Just steel on steel, heart on heart. Every strike from Ned was precise, patient, almost like he remembered how Jon fought, like he had trained him for this moment. Jon's breath tore out in gasps. "You're not him," he whispered. "You'll never be him." The dead man didn't answer. He only raised ice. But Jon didn't wait. He dropped to one knee, ducked under the arc, and drove Longclaw straight, through Ned's heart. The body staggered. The eyes flickered. The smile vanished. Then the thing that wore Ned Stark collapsed into the snow. Jon fell to his knees beside it, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw something, not the Night King, not a monster. He saw his father, the real one, just long enough to say goodbye. Then the others charged. Rickon lunged at Robb, his tiny hands curled like claws. Robb grabbed him, lifted him, held him close. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and drove his dagger into his brother's spine. Catelyn came for Arya, arms stretched wide like a memory of safety, her mouth forming a shape that almost looked like Arya's name. But Arya didn't falter this time. She leapt forward, spun, and sliced through the neck. Catelyn's head rolled into the snow. The dead Starks lay still, but the damage was done. The walls of Winterfell were breached. Inside, chaos reigned. The Lannister soldiers who had camped outside had entered during the dragonfire lull, expecting to find allies. Instead, they found hell. The dead tore through their ranks in seconds. Swords were useless unless laced with dragonglass. Most never stood a chance. Jaime fought beside Brienne of Tarth, their blades soaked in blackened ichor. He had come north to redeem himself. She had come north because she made an oath to a woman who'd never returned. They died standing side by side. Jaime, smiling. Brienne, silent. Sansa dragged the last of the wounded toward the great hall. She barred the doors. Gendry sealed them with oil and lit the perimeter in flame. "This is the last room," he said. "If they break through, we die." "No," Sansa said. "We burn." Elsewhere, Daenerys landed Drogon in the Godswood. His wing was mangled. Blood leaked from his side. She jumped off and ran to Bran, who still sat beneath the heart tree, eyes white, skin pale. "You need to wake," she said. "We're losing everything." Bran blinked, but when he spoke, it wasn't to her. "He's here." She turned slowly. The snow parted, the trees bent. The Night King stepped into the Godswood. He walked through flame without blinking. His boots cracked frozen roots. His blade was in his hand, a long, curved thing of ice that shimmered like glass and death. Daenerys stood between him and Bran. "No more," she hissed. Drogon roared behind her. She stepped forward. So did he. And then, suddenly he stopped. He looked at her. Not her face, but her blood, her fire. The last of the dragon's kin. He raised a single finger. Drogon whimpered and fell. The dragon dropped like stone, not dead, not dying, obedient. He had taken Viserion with ice. Now he would take Drogon with silence. Daenerys screamed, "No!" And the Night King touched the hilt of his blade to the ground. Winter exploded. A wave of frost surged outward, engulfing the god's wood, the walls, the keep, the towers. Ice claimed stone. Frost bit into fire. Everything stopped. Everything froze except Bran and Arya. She was already running, not toward the Night King, around him, through the shadows behind the trees. One breath too, she leapt. He turned and caught her mid-air. His hand wrapped around her throat, lifted her, held her like a ghost holding on to the past. She choked. Her fingers opened. The dagger dropped. He tilted his head, and then Jon screamed. It wasn't a name, it wasn't a word, just sound. Pure, defiant, human sound. The kind of sound no corpse can make. And it pulled the Night King's eyes for half a heartbeat. Just enough. Arya grabbed the dagger from her falling hand, switched grip, and drove it into his throat. Not his chest, not his back, his throat. His voice. The thing that had whispered across centuries. He froze. Literally. Cracks bloomed across his skin like spiderwebs of light. His eyes flared, then shattered. He fell backward in silence, and all around them, the dead followed, every white walker, every risen Stark. They crumbled like ash in the wind. The storm broke, the snow stopped. The silence ended. Winter was over. But Winterfell was quiet, too quiet. Jon reached Arya. She fell into his arms. Daenerys collapsed beside Drogon, weeping. Robb walked through the courtyard, sword down, hands shaking. Gendry opened the great hall. Sansa stepped into the sun, and Bran said, "At last it's done." But no one knew what came next. They had saved the world, but they had lost their home. And in the silence that followed, only the old gods remained, watching, waiting, remembering. Watching, waiting, remembering.